They say the worst moments of your life don't announce themselves with thunder. They arrive quietly, like a text message that could have been a lifeline and turns out to be an apology for not showing up. Mine came on a Saturday that should have been ordinary. A checkup, a ride across town. Nothing more dramatic than fluorescent lights and a paper gown. "Ethan," I said into the phone, "I need you to drive me to the hospital this afternoon. They're adjusting my medication again, and they want me monitored for a few hours. I won't be able to drive back afterward." He laughed the way young men laugh when they think time belongs to them. "Dad, I told you, tonight is the boat party. Chloe's friends rented the deck. There's a DJ, a theme, the whole thing. It's kind of a big deal." "It's not a surgery," I said, trying to sound lighter than I felt. "Just a precaution. They're worried about dizziness on the new pills. I don't want to risk driving." Silence stretched, thin and cold. "Can't you call a cab?" he asked. "You've got that neighbor, what's his name? The one with the pickup?" "His name is Noah," I said. "And I'm not going to ask him again. I'm asking my son." He inhaled sharply, impatience fizzing through the line. "Don't guilt-trip me, Dad. I already promised I'd be there. I've been working all week. I need one night." I stared at the magnet on the fridge, an old photo strip of Ethan and me at a baseball game when he was 10. Sunburned noses, hot dogs, his head tipping onto my shoulder in the last frame. You take a picture because you're sure the feeling will last. You learn later that feelings spoil if you don't refrigerate them with attention. "It's fine," I said finally. "You're busy. I'll drive myself." "You're the best," he said, relief all over the words. "You'll be okay. You always are." He hung up. In my mind, I heard a click that wasn't the call ending. It was a hinge, a door, something closing for good. I left early to avoid traffic, turning onto the long strip of highway that leads past the river. The sky had the color of steel and water that have long ago agreed to be the same thing. Halfway across the bridge, a truck drifted a few inches into my lane. I nudged right. My old sedan shuddered against the guardrail, and what happened next took less than a second and the rest of my life. The rear tire bit metal, burst, and spun me into a smooth, hopeless pirouette. There wasn't pain at first, just surprise. Then the sound of everything I knew becoming useless at once. When I woke, there was a ceiling I didn't recognize and a nurse who said my name as if she were afraid of breaking it. People who have never been helpless don't understand how loud a quiet room can be. When the doctor came, he wasn't cruel, only efficient. A fracture at T12, clean as a snapped pencil. "We'll do everything," he said. "But we're preparing for long-term mobility changes. A wheelchair, at least for a while. We'll know more after the swelling." For a while. People in white coats rarely lie, but sometimes the words they choose are made of hope instead of facts. Weeks later, the swelling receded and the verdict stayed. "Mr. Caldwell, we're going to help you build a new normal," the physical therapist said, kneeling to my eye level. "It won't be the life you had, but it can be a life." Ethan didn't come that first day, or the second. On the third, he arrived unshaven, smelling faintly of someone else's cologne. He set a to-go coffee on the tray table like a trophy he'd won for remembering I existed. "Dad," he said, "I'm here." "I can see that," I told him. "How was the party?" He frowned at the brace around my torso. "Are you mad at me?" "Why would I be mad?" I asked. "I was the one driving." "Exactly," he said, relieved to be off the hook I hadn't thrown. "There was nothing I could have done." There is always something we can do, I thought. We can show up. We can hold a hand. We can sit in a hallway and pretend the cheap coffee tastes like courage. He visited again a week later, then not at all. When I was discharged, the hospital arranged an ambuvan to bring me home. The driver maneuvered the chair up the ramp and into my living room, as if he'd been mapping my floor plan in his head for years. Then he left, and the house settled around me like a coat I had outgrown. I learned that light switches are too high, and cabinet handles are too far, and rugs are malicious in ways you only notice when they catch a wheel. I learned the little humiliation of asking for help, and the larger one of discovering you have no one to ask. On the second night, when I was trying to transfer from the chair to the bed, and failed, wedging myself at a stupid angle that made me feel less like a man and more like laundry, there was a knock on the doorframe. "Mr. Caldwell?" A head with a mess of dark curls leaned in. "It's Noah, your neighbor. I heard the van earlier. You need a hand?" I wanted to say no. Pride is a pair of shoes you keep trying to wear even when the laces are flames. "If you don't mind," I said, trying to make it sound like an invitation rather than a surrender. He stepped in gently, exactly the way you walk into someone else's pain. "Okay, we're going to do this slow," he said, hand on my shoulder. "I've got the lift belt. On 3. Noah was 24, studying to be a paramedic, and working nights at the warehouse down the road to afford classes. I had lent him a drill once when he moved in. He had returned it with new bits as a thank you. He started stopping by after his shifts, just to make sure I wasn't trapped by my own stubbornness. He rearranged the kitchen so the plates were a reachable democracy. He rolled up the rugs and built a ramp from 2 planks he sanded in his tiny backyard. He put grippy tape on the bottom of the shower chair. None of it felt like charity. It felt like competence. Ethan texted that week. "How's the chair situation? Also, I might need to borrow the SUV for a few days. Chloe's car is in the shop." I stared at the message until it blurred. "Come by. We'll talk." He didn't come. When I didn't offer the keys by phone, apparently, the need evaporated. I had always been a practical man. I started a small logistics company at 27, with 1 battered van, and a stubborn belief I could out-deliver bigger firms by caring more about every package. I sold the company 15 years ago, when my hands finally convinced my head that I didn't want to be in warehouses at dawn anymore. I invested conservatively. I lived modestly. People assume modest men are poor. They're wrong as often as they're rude. I had told Ethan none of this. I had thought, foolishly, that money not being in the room made it easier for love to speak. If you want to know which people love you, remove every reason to pretend. Noah saw none of it either. He didn't see the statements or the property taxes or the old business photos. He saw only me, a stubborn old man who wanted to make his own breakfast and kept missing the top shelf. He never asked what I had. He asked what I needed. We settled into a rhythm. In the mornings, I practiced transfers until the motions of my arms began to memorize me back. In the afternoons, Noah would drive me to physical therapy in his pickup, the chair strapped down in the back with the care you reserve for something you plan to return in perfect condition. He told me about class, about airway management and triage, and the nights he lay awake wondering if he would freeze when a life depended on his hands. "Freezing is just your body waiting for better instructions," I told him. "Write them in advance." Ethan visited on a Sunday in October, his jaw tight with a kind of bravado that looks like bravery if you squint. He handed me a folded brochure. "Luxury condos. "You can't keep this big place, Dad," he said, tapping the glossy photo. "Stairs, maintenance. It's dangerous. I know a guy who can get you a unit here. Elevators, concierge, pool therapy. We could sell this place and—" "We?" I asked. His eyes flicked away. "I just mean I can handle it for you. Lists and agents and paperwork. I'm trying to help." Noah stood quietly in the kitchen doorway, drying his hands on a dish towel, and in that moment, the distance between the two young men felt like a topographical map of my failures. I had raised a son who used the word help to mean remove obstacles between me and what I want. I had loaned a drill to a neighbor who returned it with interest. "Leave the brochure," I said, wheeling the chair a few inches forward. "I'll think about it." He left it. He did not take the dishes to the sink after he ate. Noah did. That night, I took out a folder from the safe in my closet. Old papers, new papers, the scaffolding of a life held together by staples and signatures. I called my lawyer, Priya Patel, who had a way of turning the complicated into the inevitable. "I need to update my will," I told her, "and I'm going to ask you for something unusual." "Unusual is what fees were invented for," she said dryly. "What do you have in mind?" I told her. "Not everything, just the bones. Half to the person who had acted like a son, half to the son who had acted like a stranger, but not a gift handed over into a pair of thoughtless hands. A condition. Work tethered to worth. A lesson pinned to a lifeline." "You're certain?" she asked when I finished. "I am," I said. "I don't want to punish my boy. I want him to become the man I thought I was raising." We created the Caldwell Family Fund. It would finance ramps for old houses like mine, van lifts, home health hours for people who couldn't afford them, and scholarships for paramedic trainees who kept showing up even when no one was clapping. Half the estate would seed the fund immediately under Noah's stewardship, with a board Priya and I assembled, practical, stubborn, allergic to grandstanding. The other half, Ethan's half, would sit in trust, unlocked only if he met the terms. They weren't complicated. They were work. 2 years volunteering weekly at the rehab hospital, where I learned to be new. A job, paid or unpaid, completing at least one community accessibility project every quarter with the fund team. 10 hours a month visiting family members or former neighbors over 60, logged not in selfies but in the notes of the social workers who could sniff out phonies like dogs smell weather. If he walked the walk, his share would join the fund, his name tied to good work instead of good intentions. If he didn't, the trust would dissolve into the fund without him, and the city would be full of quiet monuments he might pass on the way to parties without knowing they were the shape of his could-have been. I wrote the letter last. The words came slower than I wanted, because truth has a way of resisting being domesticated. I kept it in the safe with the old photo strip and a set of keys I no longer needed. Life moved on the way life does when it has decided not to wait for you. There were good days, when my hands found the wheels without thinking, and the chair felt less like a label and more like a tool. There were bad days, when the ache in my back hummed like an electrical line, and I wanted to fling the mirror into the yard for how casually it told me I was smaller now. Noah kept showing up. When winter came, he shoveled a clean lane from my door to the curb every morning before work. "It'll ice," he said, "and if you're anything like me, you'll decide at the worst possible moment that you can do something alone. This is me pre-forgiving you for that choice." At Christmas, Ethan sent a group text, a photo of him and Chloe in a cabin with friends, sweaters, mugs, Jokes about Coco spiked with anything but the responsibility he'd left here. "Merry Christmas, Dad," he wrote beneath it. "We'll visit after New Year's. Promise." We decided to do something with the fund before I was just a portrait on a wall in a room where the youngest person keeps glancing at their watch. Noah identified a block of houses at the far edge of the city where porches sat 3 steps above possibilities. We partnered with a carpenter who employed veterans and a mason who thanked me with a nod thick with meaning when I insisted we pay full rate. No discounts for the story. We built ramps that didn't look like afterthoughts, that made the houses themselves sigh with relief. We installed grab bars that looked like design, not admission of defeat. We timed it so neighbors saw neighbors keep their dignity instead of lose their balance. When the first grandmother rolled out onto the porch and cried because she could watch her grandchildren play again, I felt something open in my chest that the injury had tried to weld shut. Ethan dropped by in March. He looked tired in a way spending money can't fix. He picked up the ramp brochure still sitting on the bookshelf where I'd left it like a math problem he never solved. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes sliding off mine. "Maybe I could move in for a while. Help out." "Help who?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "You. You think moving in will help you," I said. "And maybe you're right. But you don't move into a person, Ethan. You show up for them." He set the brochure down and exhaled another promise onto the pile of his others. "Fine. What do you want me to do?" "Take me to physical therapy this week," I said. "Sit in the waiting room. Read a book. Drive me home. Ask the nurse what you should watch for at night. And bring the trash cans back from the curb on Tuesday without being asked." He stared. "Is this a test?" "Everything important is," I said. He took me to therapy. He waited. He brought the cans back on Wednesday because he forgot on Tuesday, and he was annoyed at the lecture he didn't receive. He lasted 3 weeks before Chloe booked a trip. "It's only 4 days," he said. "I'll make it up to you." "I hope you do," I said. After he left, Noah knocked on the door jamb, the rhythm our doorbell. "We're short a pair of hands this weekend," he said. "If you feel up to it, I could use a bossly presence at the site." "Bossly," I repeated. "Is that a medical term?" "It is now," he said. On the site, I watched 17-year-olds who looked like they had been born with phones in their hands learn how to angle a screw so the wood holds its breath and lets you pass. I told stories about warehouses and deadlines and how you never lose money on the customer you treat like a person. They listened, which surprised me until I remembered that young people will drink from any cup that doesn't pretend to be a fountain. Spring turned to summer. The fund took shape as something large enough to stand without my hand beneath it. Noah enrolled in the last term of his program. He came home jittery and empty after trauma rotations, and I told him there is a difference between carrying someone and carrying the moment, and he should choose the latter if he wanted a life. He nodded, eyes bright with a gratitude we didn't cheapen by naming. Then, in late August, my heart misbehaved. Nothing dramatic. No collapsing on a ramp. No speech turned to static. Just a tightening. A whisper reminding me that even good plans obey a clock. The cardiologist adjusted my meds and frowned at the chart in a way that felt like an omen clearing its throat. I added a page to the letter and slept better that night than I had in months. I didn't tell Ethan about the episode. He texted once that week to ask if I knew a contractor willing to swap favors. I said no. He sent a thumbs up emoji as if that were a sentence. When autumn came, The leaves on the maple out front turned the exact color of warning cones, and I found it funny for reasons I couldn't explain. I put on a sweater I loved because old men are allowed to love sweaters without apology. Noah came over with a pizza and a stack of bills that needed signatures. We ate. We planned. He told me he'd passed his final. Paramedic. The word fit him the way some words just do, like names you don't grow out of even when they don't fit your age. The night I didn't wake up was unremarkable. A book on the nightstand. A lamp left on because I've always liked the way rooms look surprised in the morning when the light is still there. It is not true that you see your life flash before your eyes. What you see, I think, is the last person you became and whether or not you like him. The will reading happened in Priya's office, sunlight lying across the long table like a ribbon someone forgot to put away. Ethan arrived in a suit that looked like it belonged to a man who had not yet earned it. He sat, jaw hard, already bracing for what I had threatened months ago in a moment of fury. Priya spoke calmly. She had the voice of a metronome. Mr. Caldwell updated his will 6 months ago, and again last month. We'll begin with his letter. She unfolded the pages, my handwriting upright and precise. She read, Ethan, if you're hearing this, I'm somewhere you can't call me from. It would be unfair, sir, to pretend I was always the father you needed. I worked too much when you were small, and I talked about character when what you wanted was attention. I am sorry for those days. There is another thing I can't apologize for, though. Asking you to be a better man than convenience says you can be. On the day I needed a ride, you chose a party. I do not blame you for the crash. I blame you for the absence. You were not there when there was nothing to gain. That was my grief, not my punishment for you. In my anger, I told you I would leave you nothing. I said it because I wanted to hurt the version of you that believed love was a vending machine. I will not let that be my last word to my only son. I am leaving half of my estate to a fund that already knows what to do with it. You have met Noah. He earned nothing from me and then earned everything I could give by showing up. The fund will build ramps and pay caregivers and train people who want to run toward sirens when others run away. There will be board members who don't pose for photos and whose hands bear the marks of work. Your name will not be on any plaque until your actions carve it there. The other half is yours, if you want it the way a man wants responsibility more than he wants comfort. For 2 years, I ask you to do 3 things. Visit at least 2 elders a month identified by the rehab hospital. Sit with them. Listen. Take notes for the social workers. Learn the faces of loneliness and the ways it softens when someone uses your name. Join the fund team once a quarter to complete a project with your hands. Hold the drill. Carry the lumber. Be the guy who returns the tool with new bits. Volunteer 2 mornings a month in the spinal unit where I learned how to live again. You will hate the smell. You will hate the way time slows. You will feel useful and useless in alternating waves. Keep showing up. If you do this, the trust releases to you in full and then into the fund with your name beside mine as a partner, not as a son who collected. If you do not, the trust disappears into the work without you. I will not haunt you. The city will. Ethan, I don't want a better obituary. I want a better man to carry what I built. If you ever wonder whether I loved you, it was always yes. I just wanted that love to be a bridge you walked across, not a couch you fell asleep on. Dad. He didn't speak at first. Priya handed him a copy of the terms, and his fingers hovered above the page like birds uncertain of the weather. "So that's it?" he asked finally, incredulous, trying to disguise itself as indignation. "No cash if I don't play handyman for 2 years?" "That's an uncharitable reading," Priya said mildly. "It's an invitation to live your way into the man Mr. Caldwell believed you could be." Noah sat across from him, not smug, not even satisfied, just present, which I have learned is the rarest posture of all. "I'll help you," he said quietly, "if you want it." Ethan looked at him the way a drowning man looks at a dock he isn't sure he deserves to grab. "Why would you?" "Because he asked me to," Noah said, "and because I think you might want to like yourself." The first month, he visited 2 elders at the rehab hospital and left both rooms sweating as if he'd run stairs. He called Priya to ask if signing in counted as hours if the patients fell asleep. She said yes, and that the point was not to be thanked. He showed up on a Saturday build and carried plywood until his soft hands blistered, and he was surprised by how proud he felt of something that seemed, on paper, so small. He tried to skip the spinal unit morning because Chloe planned brunch. "There will be other brunches," Noah told him. "There won't be another morning with Mr. Alvarez, who only trusts the first volunteer who keeps his promise." He went. He helped a man with a shaved head and eyes like kindness learn how to pivot on a slideboard. He wheeled a woman to the solarium so she could watch the birds that nested in the rafters. None of it made him a hero. All of it made him different. When he showed up at Noah's door the next week, he looked embarrassed in a way that felt honest. "I told her I couldn't go to the lake," he said. "She asked why, and I said because my father asked me to be someone else." "How'd that go?" Noah asked. She said, "So he's still controlling you?" And I said, "No, he's still raising me." Ethan laughed without humor. And then she left. "Sometimes the world rearranges around the person you're becoming," Noah said. "Sometimes it leaves." He failed a few times. He forgot a visit because he thought a client meeting would run short. It didn't. He learned how to apologize to a woman who had waited in a lobby wearing the good scarf. He tried to shortcut a ramp install by eyeballing the slope. An inspector measured and shook his head without malice, and Ethan spent a Sunday taking apart what he'd built wrong and putting it back together better. He learned the names of tools he'd never cared about. He learned the names of nurses who did more work than their paychecks admitted. He learned the difference between influence and usefulness. At the end of the first year, Priya convened the board in a room not unlike the one where the will had been read. Ethan presented a report written in his own plain handwriting. He didn't perform. He accounted. "I thought this would be punishment," he said, eyes steady. "It feels like repair." He kept showing up. The second year, a winter storm knocked out power across the east side, and the fun team turned the rehab hospital gym into a warming center that smelled like cots and stories. Ethan hauled extension cords and made bad coffee and learned that leadership is sometimes just telling someone, "I'll be here when you wake up." He called Noah at 2 a.m. and said, "I'm glad you knocked on my father's door." Noah said, "I'm glad he answered." On the last day of the second year, Priya slid a folder across the table. "Congratulations," she said. "The trust is now yours to direct according to the terms you've met." Ethan opened it and looked at the number without flinching. He closed it and looked at Noah instead. "I want to put my share into a program that pays for home health hours for caregivers who haven't taken a day off in a year," he said. "I met too many Mrs. Kellys and not enough people who noticed." "And your name?" Priya asked. Plaques are being ordered next week. The printers like as few changes as possible. He smiled. Not the boy-man grin he wore in photos, but something quieter that might survive storms. Put Dad's, he said, and the team's. If mine shows up, let it be because somebody asked who was always there on Wednesdays. On the anniversary of my death, Ethan went to the cemetery alone. He took off his gloves and said words into the cold that I can't claim I deserved, because deserve is a math problem people use when they're scared of grace. Dad, he said, I was angry at you for building a fence around your love. I thought the work was the price of admission. It wasn't. It was the path out of the person I'd become. I'm not finished. I don't know if people ever are. But yesterday, Mr. Alvarez told me he stood up at his kitchen counter without help. He said the birds in the solarium still nest in the same corner. I don't know what that means, except that I think some things stay if you build them right. He put his palm on the stone the way sons have done since stones existed. You didn't take anything from me, he said softly. You gave me a way back. Noah waited by the truck, letting the man have his minutes. When Ethan finally climbed in, he held the wheel like a promise. Let's go, he said. We've got the Rivera install at 10, and Mrs. Kelly's caregiver is taking her first day off at noon. I told her we'd sit with him until she gets back. You know, Noah said, for a guy who used to hate Saturdays that didn't involve a boat, you've become very domestic. Shut up, Ethan said, and laughed, and started the engine. They drove to a small house with a porch too high for the life inside it. They measured twice and cut once and learned another name. Somewhere on a wall I never asked for, my portrait probably hangs in the corner of a conference room. People look at it occasionally and feel the nudge that there was a man called Henry Caldwell who trusted them to keep choosing the harder thing. This is not a story about punishment. It's a story about doors. Some close with a click, and some swing open when you put your shoulder against them long enough. I left my son a door. He did the rest. If you're looking for a moral, try this one. You cannot undo the night you chose a party, but you can build a ramp so someone else makes it to theirs. And if you're lucky, the person you become will be someone you would have driven anywhere, no questions asked.